Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan. I am your host, and today is a different episode. We have not covered anything like this on the pod before, so I'm really excited to share some of this with you guys and get into this conversation as we're going to be talking about hunting. And a lot of you have asked questions about like my eating habits, and I'm mostly vegetarian. So this will be a very interesting conversation to have. A lot of you guys know that I love going to the Ballard Farmers Market, and a few times I'd gone, I saw this man there, and he had a little stand to learn more about hunting, and I was like, oh, that seems interesting, and then ended up meeting him at an event in Seattle at the Works, and he has actually been hunting for about over 30 years and is very experienced in the Pacific Northwest and has these courses that he takes people out and teaches them how to hunt and kind of get reconnected with nature. And I just thought it was such a fascinating way to go about hunting and just kind of to look at life. And so I'm really, really excited to get started with this conversation. And also small world of Seattle that Bruce actually is somewhat related to Bachelor Nation. So let's get started here. Bruce, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I appreciate that hunting is probably not on everybody's mind, but yes, food is a big part of it. And that's one thing everybody has in common.
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing that I did not at all think that we would have in common was The Bachelor. So you actually went to college with Jason Mesnick, who lives here in Seattle.
Yep.
Yes, and he was The Bachelor and is married to Molly, who has a show here with iHeart as well. So super, super small world that you even are related in some way to this world.
I haven't taken Jason out hunting yet, but I have taken him out salmon fishing. So
yeah,
maybe hunting's next.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. So I just want to kind of get a little bit of like a backstory in some of this, because you've been doing these courses now this is kind of like a newish thing, right? In the last few years.
3-4 years.
Yeah. That you've started doing the courses, but I'm curious if you can talk a little bit just about how all of this kind of came up for you and if this was something you like grew up around. And
yeah, well, I went to school at the University of Washington. I went to the College of Engineering, got a degree, and started working downtown here in civil structural design for a private firm. And
exciting.
Long story short, I mean, it was good work and good people, but I just wasn't feeling totally fulfilled. And I mean, even further back, I've been hunting is probably something that runs in my blood and experience for the longest amount of time. I mean, I literally grew up with it. My dad taught me to hunt. My earliest memory was, I think, when I was 3.
Wow.
Riding on his shoulders when he was out pheasant hunting in the Columbia Basin. And have this vague memory of a rooster flushing and him taking a shot. I don't know what happened, but it left quite an impression on me, you can say. And you know, his dad taught him and so on, and it's just something that I grew up with. And over time, I mean, I've experienced something really special about being out there, particularly just being in the hunt. And it's something I wanted to share with people, but I never knew quite how to share it or incorporate it into the other parts of my life. And as I had more and more time to just be quiet and kind of get grounded and ask myself what I wanted to do with my time here, and what I had to offer the world.
Those are some big questions.
It became clear that, or for me at least, I wanted to address this issue that I think, you know, we've been disconnecting from nature a little bit as a trend. And I feel it's important to address that and offer opportunities to get reconnected on a fundamental level. And I think hunting is unique in that it offers that opportunity to really become a participant in our food, our ecosystem, you know, the circle of life and death. It forces us to take responsibility for our actions, our food, what we're eating, how we're interacting with our environment.
Which I think people are so disconnected from. Like, and I think a large part of that reason is because we don't want to.
Yeah, it's been a pretty quick change, and thanks to, the world's a complicated place, and the Industrial Revolution changed a lot of things, and our marketplace, and it became real easy to outsource a lot of things, and pretty short order we got out of the.
Yeah, and to not, when we go into stores now, and even when we buy food out, we're not really associating the fact that we're eating a burger and that's like a cow. Like, we're not making those kinds of connections to our food anymore. And I think in part it makes us feel a lot more comfortable with ourselves because we're not having to face that. And so I like how you said that by doing this, you've been able to kind of take accountability and responsibility for our actions in doing this. And it's to me, it's such a fascinating way to go about participating in your food system. And one thing that I want to ask you is, like, when I think, so I'll start with saying that I'm not totally against the idea of hunting. I am primarily vegetarian. I don't think I could ever personally kill something and eat it. I also probably wouldn't survive very well in the wilderness. But I'm curious, like, when you look at how our marketplace has changed and we see this abundance of food that we have in our society and how much food we're wasting, of why you would then go and kill an animal that maybe doesn't need to be killed because we already have this abundance of food in the marketplace.
That's a good question. I'll start by saying I feel like we as a society, or at least here in the U.S., probably could afford to eat less meat.
Yes.
And I appreciate your comments about hunting. I mean, it's not an easy thing to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And it's hard to take it out of context, too. There's nothing I like about killing an animal.
Which I think is, like, so unique to hear from a hunter.
It's probably, true. And it's probably true for a lot of hunters. And sitting here thinking about it, it's nothing, I don't have the urge to go out there and shoot something.
Yeah.
It's only when I get into the process, and particularly have a chance to get out there for several days and get into the hunt. I mean, the hunt is where there's a lot of work that goes into preparation and then the hunt. And if you're lucky, you get a shot at something. And then there's a tremendous amount of work afterwards to haul that out of the mountains, to process it and preserve it. And I'm trying to remember what your original question. Why would I want to kill something?
When we have kind of this abundance of food. That's
a really good question because, well, maybe it's counterintuitive, but I feel like, for me at least, having these experiences, being connected to an animal, spending time in its natural habitat, being part of its life and death, and respecting that.
Yeah.
I mean, every ounce of meat I pack out of the woods, I take care of. I handle, I do all the butchering myself, wrap it for the freezer, and every piece I pull out and eat and share with friends and family, I'm very appreciative for. I don't waste anything. And one of the first meals we do at these hunting courses after we teach people how to butcher an animal is our professional chef cooks fajitas with the heart and liver. And most of them don't even know that it's heart and liver. It's so good. But it's this idea of using everything you possibly can. And so to get back to your original question, I think because of that connection that I have and some hunters have to that process, it demands a deeper respect for the resource. And so if I go into the store and buy something and forget to use it, it goes bad, so what? It's not a big deal. I didn't have a connection to that meat or the food or the vegetables or whatever it is. But being part of this whole process and then seeing that wasted, it kind of hits me personally and, emotionally.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. And that's, again, where I was like, this would be a really interesting episode to do, because I think kind of your average stereotype of a hunter is, at least in my head, is the guy in the South that's like, oh, I'm going to go shoot some deer and just wanting to kill things just for the sake of killing them and being able to exercise their right to use their guns however they want. And certainly a part of that is, we're going to eat the elk that I shot and, we're going to use that. But I think maybe this is just in my stereotype of my mind, but there hasn't been this emphasis on connection and appreciation throughout the process. And I think you're 100% right. Like, I think a huge difference in, purchasing the meat at the grocery store and going out and doing this kind of hunting experience is a huge lack of connection and appreciation. And the same for even vegetables. When I go to the farmer's market and I get to meet the farmer and I get to talk to them and I get to, purchase the broccoli that I can only imagine how long that even took to grow and how much resources and energy had to go into that being able to, then fuel and nourish me. You don't want to waste that. You want to use up every bit of it that you possibly can.
And take that one step further. If you garden and grow your own produce, how much energy and time goes into it. And so to just watch that stuff go bad in the fridge is kind of a waste of energy and effort.
Absolutely.
And to your earlier point, part of the work I think we have to do is creating a new name for hunting. Because there has been some bad examples, and there's a variety of, a whole spectrum of hunters out there, just like there's a whole spectrum of humans in society. And it's often the bad news that gets shared, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, now we're sharing the good news.
Now we're sharing hopefully some of the good news. But also to keep it in perspective, I mean, talking about time here, it's, last 100 years or so, 100 years ago, plus or minus, we outlawed commercial hunting. So before that, there was a lot of pressure on animals. That's partly what wiped out the native buffalo herds because people were shooting them for their hides and their tongues and leaving them on the prairie. But if we step back a little further and say, some of the best estimates by archaeologists is that there's been some form of human hunter-gatherer roaming this planet for, about 2 million years.
It's a long time.
And if I was to spread out my arms, which are about 6 feet long, and that represented 2 million years, and then we were to think about when agriculture and the written language started about 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, which kind of shifted things a little bit. That 5,000 to 10,000 years would be about the end of the overhang of my fingernail, which is not very long.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little sliver in the whole 6 feet spectrum of kind of the human hunter-gatherer history. And so this has been in our genes. It's been part of us. I think, hunting alone is not the answer, but it's the kind of the conscious connection that comes with it that could be part of the solution. Because there's been examples of hunting societies in the past that have not managed the resource well and overdone it.
Yeah. So I want to take a short break. I know that some of you who follow me and who listen to the podcast might be looking to start businesses or that you already run a creative business and want to share with you guys a sponsor for the podcast called HoneyBook, which is an online business management tool that lets you control your client communication, your bookings, contracts, and invoices all in one place. So if you're a creative freelancer or small business owner, HoneyBook helps you stay organized with custom templates and automation tools. You can even use HoneyBook to consolidate services that you already use like Google Suite, MailChimp, or QuickBooks. It's really just your business. They're just helping make it a little bit better. And right now, HoneyBook is offering our listeners 50% off your first year with the promo code Taylor. Your payment is flexible. And this promotion also applies whether you pay monthly or annually. So you've got some options here. You guys can go to honeybook.com and use promo code Taylor for 50% off your first year. That's really give it a go. You can get paid faster. You can work smarter, all with honeybook.com and use promo code Taylor. And now we can get back to the show. I hope that this is very useful for some of you. So make sure to check it out. I'm curious if we think about how long this has been in our DNA and just that small sliver of time that we've occupied, and how disconnected and how far away it seems from our, innate nature now. Where do you think that because hunting in our genes in that way would have served a sense of purpose, some kind of an outlet? And now that we're not doing that, where do you think we see that outlet being used?
That's a good question. And
does that question make sense?
No, it does. And,
okay.
I'm not an expert on the history of violence or things like that, but I wonder sometimes. I mean, having grown up with this and being taught to respect firearms and knowing that it just was not a toy and it was not something to use other than in a completely safe way and in a safe environment. I wonder if some kids had that opportunity in a healthy environment, that if it would avoid some trouble down the road. And we're trying to work part of that into our program in terms of providing opportunities for, say, inner city kids and folks that don't have much opportunity to experience this, to provide opportunities to get them out a little bit and start shedding the light. I mean, it's a tricky subject, obviously, but I think there are opportunities.
Definitely. And I remember one of the first questions that I asked you when we first started talking was like, how many women do you actually have that join you on these, excursions and these adventures? Like, because in my head, I'm like, oh, this is probably just a group of men.
It's actually pretty good, a quarter to a third, typically. And about 20 years ago, my mom started a program called Washington Outdoor Women. And it's a nonprofit, women teaching women outdoor skills. But she recruited my dad and myself to help with the hunting course. And we started teaching that. It was very, it was pretty low interest back then. 3 or 4 people signed up for the first one. Yeah. But over time, it became more and more popular, and to the point where it was filling up quickly, 15 to 20 students, women. And, one of the things I start with, and it's just a 4-hour course, a real quick overview of hunting. But we start with kind of a introduction of people and asking them why they're interested. And a lot of them share these stories of growing up in a family that hunted, but their dad took their brothers out, but never took them. It wasn't something that they were supposed to do. The last few generations was sort of like that. But now they're wanting to reconnect to that heritage. And I don't think it's talking about our DNA and our background and stuff. There's a lot there. I don't know. I can't really speak as an expert, but I don't know if hunting is for everybody. I mean, maybe there was a percentage of the population that were hunters.
And that were gatherers.
Some men, some women, and some were gatherers, and maybe that gene carried down to some and others. I don't know. It's just
I mean, that's kind of what like my thought process is here. It's like, okay, as we talk about, the history of this and the genes being passed down and whatnot, like that would have more typically been for the males, and that the gathering of the vegetables and berries and whatnot would have been through women. And I think that's amazing that you have kind of almost like an equal balance here of men and women wanting to learn about this and going out and experiencing this. And even when I just think about, like, if I were to go out there, I would have such an intense emotional experience. And I'm curious for you if you've seen such a difference in like emotional reactions or spiritual experiences when you're out there for the men versus the women.
Not really. I mean, most of it would be, say, like during the courses where we spend a day working on a large animal. We teach them how to field dress it and skin it and butcher it, break it down like we would any deer or elk in the field. And the men and the women get right in there just the same. Sometimes the kids are a little bit not sure how to take it all, but they watch and kind of observe from a distance, and pretty soon they're right in there curious, and wanting to get their hands on it and work on it.
Well, I don't know. I might just be real weird then, because if I were to go out there and I want to, and that's why I'm hoping to, like, okay, we're doing this episode now, and then maybe after I do an experience, we recap and do another episode on it. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's been so outside of my experience growing up that I think I would just, like, I would bawl my eyes out. Like, it'd be very emotional.
It is very emotional. And I've had a number of hunts that I've gotten up to something and I could have shot it, but it didn't feel right. So I held off and just sat there, and I was with, kind of in the presence of it for a while, and that was it. And that was enough. And a big part of this really is the hunt, which happens ahead of time. And that's why I didn't want to get into guiding and outfitting so much, because I feel like sometimes the guides are the ones doing the hunting. The clients are there to kind of follow along and shoot when they're given the opportunity. And it's not always like that, but I think when in those situations, the person hunting, the client or the person hunting is missing a big part of the experience, which is getting out there on your own with some skills and confidence to be out there on your own, and kind of getting lost in the process, and then working to find your way, to understand the landscape, the patterns of the animals, understand your own intuitions and gut feelings as they come up.
That'd be so hard to trust.
Wake up your senses in the process. Yes, it is. They are hard to trust, and it's been several years of experiencing this and learning that. But when I stop and listen to them, they often lead me to good things, even though they're sometimes crazy ideas. But it's just this unknown kind of feeling, like, should I go this way or that way? And when you're out there, there's no trails, there are no signs, there's nothing really. I mean, it's just wilderness, and every step is a decision. And so that's a pretty unique process. I love to backpack, and I've done it all my life, and I really enjoy getting up into the alpine lakes and the beautiful areas, and that is a special connection to me as well. Yeah. And when I'm hunting, there's something different. It wakes up something different in me. It's I don't know if you can maybe relate it. If you have a cat and your cat is
I do have a cat. Thank you for asking.
Eating his or her normal cat food, and just sort of like doing the day-to-day thing. And then you pull out some sort of a feather toy. Yeah. And their eyes dilate and they get really intense. Yes. And they are paying attention. And
it's good to do that part before you feed. And I have done a lot of rescue work and dealt with, like, really cats and kittens that are just so hyper, and, like, have had to, help other fosters, and once a foster gets adopted, of helping teach the new cat mom or dad kind of how to deal with it. And it's like, yeah, you gotta do the hunt, you gotta, like, play with them a bunch, get them panting, like, really get them worked up, and then reward them with food after that. And they'll have such a different experience, because that's, like, their natural that's just the natural system that happens. They hunt, they eat, they groom and relax, and they sleep. Yeah. And they kind of just do that all over again. Cats.
Yeah.
But
and there are wild cats out there, and we've encountered them during hunting.
That would be my favorite part. I would probably cry at just seeing a big cat out there like that. It would just be so beautiful. But even how you talk about, like, the hunt itself, it sounds so much like a metaphor for life, because you're like, there's no signs, every step is a mystery. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how we go through our day-to-day life. And you're sitting in so much uncertainty when you're out there that can be so difficult to sit in just in your daily life, let alone being out in the wilderness. Just would really, like, exemplify that feeling. Yeah,
I agree. And on a good year, I can take off a couple 3 weeks in November and go back to Montana and hunt elk with some family, and we'll pack our camp by foot up from the end of the road, 4 miles into the mountains. And we're at about 8,000 feet elevation in November, and we came from sea level. So you can imagine the struggles here for the first days as we acclimate. So we pack into camp, and we have it just. I totally lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
It's okay. It's a metaphor for life.
I got so excited about the hunt and thinking about next year.
Yes. No, it's like a metaphor for life.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say.
Yeah. Happens to me all the time.
These trips, the longer trips, but having an opportunity to be in there for 3 or 4 days, to acclimate, get used to it, makes a big difference. I mean, it's more than a quick weekend getaway.
Yeah.
3 or 4 days just to kind of get grounded and get settled, and then you have a week to hunt. And of all the 52 weeks in the year, the second week of those trips and the week afterwards, kind of coming home, are the weeks I feel the best all year. And it's a combination of physical activity, I'm sure, and just breathing clean air and being out there hiking every day, and just having that time to slow down, get grounded in something natural, and connect to something bigger, and start to see how this all fits together and how we're part of it. So I think there's a lot of psychological opportunities in there to to benefit from.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of like psychological experiences, I'm curious if you could identify 3 feelings that come up for you, like when you're in the hunt.
In the hunt.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I get so focused. It's almost like a walking meditation. And sometimes I'm not even, I'm just focused on tracking. A lot of times this is November in the mountains, there's snow. So if I find some fresh tracks, I might get on them and track them for several hours or several miles through timber and clearings and over ridges. And so there's certainly a sense of like uncertainty, like, and sometimes a little fear, like how far out am I getting? I still have to hike back to camp. And sometimes I'm doing that in the dark for 2 hours trying to find my way back to camp.
That's wild to me. That's seriously just so wild to me to even think of myself in that situation.
It is wild, and it's very empowering.
Yeah.
Once you get the tools and the skills to be out there. And it's not, we take a lot of precaution and are very safe because things can go wrong out there, and you're long ways from the hospital or even a road for that matter.
Yeah.
So, and there's no cell reception, and
I can already feel the anxiety coming in because those are all things I think of. I'm like, okay, where's the nearest exit? Like, where's the local hospital?
But more than that, it's the feeling when I'm out there is like being alive, just really being a human being and doing what I was designed to do over the eons.
Yeah.
It can be a lot of hard work, but there's something that kind of pulls me and draws me, to do more and to go deeper.
Yeah, I had a feeling that alive would be one of the feelings that you would list. And one of the things that I do very much appreciate about when you do these courses with people is that you also do kind of have this focus on like the meditative part of it, and you have one like where you incorporate yoga into it, and then it really seems and feels like this not necessarily even a specifically hunting course, but like a course to just get back in touch with nature, because I think we are so far disconnected from that. And I'm sure, I would imagine for some people, even just the fact that they don't have cell reception and can't get in contact with anyone for a few days is like a whole experience in and of itself, let alone, getting in touch with these other parts of their senses and their awareness that they've, neglected or didn't even know existed. That would just be such a such an interesting spiritual, very much so awakening experience to a lot of things.
Yeah. And we do have cell reception at the cabin, but I can take your phone away if you'd like.
I mean, in all actuality, it probably is more beneficial to do it that way. But, yeah.
And the 4-day courses, the ability to do 4 days is partly designed into it to give people the opportunity to park the car and settle in for a while.
Yeah.
And part of it's just opening our home, the home of some hunters, to people who are curious to experience that culture. And it's, and to go back a step, this is really about healing the connection between humans and nature. Yeah. And hunting just happens to be a unique opportunity we have, and something I know intimately.
Something that you're skilled in. Yeah.
But it's less about teaching people to hunt, and it's more about healing that connection through hunting in this case, or some other modes. And we have people come to the course that are not, their intention is not to go out and hunt this fall.
Yeah.
But they're curious about it, and they might do it down the line a few years. They might not ever do it, but they want to at least know what the culture is like, what it's like to butcher and slaughter an animal and eat it, and what it's like to get out in the woods and track animals and waken up those senses.
Yeah, and which I do think is important for people to experience, especially if they are meat eaters, because one thing that I always say to people, when they ask about my eating habits and being primarily vegetarian, is that I say, well, if I were faced with having to murder an animal and cut it up and eat it and cook it, I probably wouldn't be able to do that. So who am I to, just purchase this and just cook it up and eat it and not have any kind of connection and not have any of that kind of accountability or responsibility that this was a life that has been taken for my purposes. It just feels a little weird and feels off to me. And anytime that I do eat meat, if I have some a charcuterie plate or something, I literally go through this mental process in my head of completely disconnecting from the fact that is any kind of animal.
Right.
In order to be able to eat it, I have to make that kind of a connection, because mentally and emotionally, to come to the terms with the fact that this was an animal, I love my cat. I would never want to do that with her.
I understand. I think the commercial meat industry has done a good job at making that point of view an easy one.
Yeah.
And
we've been very blinded.
And murder is an interesting word.
I know, I got a little intense there.
I've heard it before, and I have slaughtered a few animals, and I don't like that. And I would associate that word more with the slaughtering process, and even more with the commercial meat industry. When you think about these animals just packed in to a room and without not much life or exercise, and then their day comes, their numbers pulled, and it's over.
So you differentiate the slaughtering versus the hunt.
Definitely.
Okay.
Being out there hunting something, a wild animal, has all kinds of opportunities to get away. I mean,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Their senses are way sharper than ours. They're
they're
way more physically fit than us.
Yeah.
For running through deep snow at elevation,
True.
They smell us from a few hundred yards away, and they're gone, and we never see them.
Very true.
There are situations where, people shoot deer from the road that are kind of used to being around humans, and that's a very different hunt. I don't really consider that a hunt. It's more of a harvest.
Yeah. You're really getting my brain here in the hunt itself, because as you described that, yes, that is very different actually than what in our commercial factory farming is happening, where that really is more kind of what you would think of as a murder or a slaughter, because the animals really stand no chance. They literally zero chance at all, negative chance. But that's interesting to think about it in that way. And I could see where I don't know. I think at the core level of it, I would still emotionally see it as like I'm murdering an animal, even though it's like they have more of an advantage than I do, and it's kind of this almost like a game in a way that you have to play, like a dance. Maybe dance is a better word for it, where it would maybe feel less bad to do
in the hunting situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's really hard to take out of context.
Yeah.
If you can imagine being out there in those conditions I mentioned earlier, if you hesitate for 10 seconds or 2 seconds or even a half a second sometimes, your opportunity is gone. And so you've got, I mean, it helps to be mentally prepared and to a point of wanting to take that next step.
Yeah.
And that takes time. And it might be that the first several or many encounters you have with animals out hunting are like that. They're just fleeting glimpses because you're not ready to go over that, take that next step. But you're still being out there. You're still out there, I think, benefiting from the whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious for you how you go about kind of teaching these tools for people to be able to really be present and engage in that kind of an experience when, you know, I'm sure having people that have never done anything like that before, like what are those tools and how you get someone to that place?
Well, part of it's, you know, having time to work with a live animal, and just to step back a little bit there. These courses are outside the hunting season. Hunting seasons are pretty short in the fall. There's not enough time to teach people and hunt.
Yeah.
So we work with a local farmer who raises lambs. You know, we use a large lamb, and it is a slaughter. But we ask that the farmer does it where the lamb is in a a farmyard, free range, and used to being there. They're in comfortable surroundings, so it's a pretty quick process. And then they bring it over and drop it in the woods. I run a blood trail out to it, and people then track through the woods to find the animal. We get to work on it like we would any wild animal. And there's been a lot of conversation about why don't you bring the lamb over and slaughter it in front of the people? They need to experience that. And I don't want to go there because this is one of the first things we do. And I don't think, I mean, the kill, I think, is something you work up to and you earn over time. It's not something you just throw around or start with.
Absolutely.
And so getting back to your question, how do you teach that and prepare people for that? It's not easy. And part of it is, you know, taking time to have some dialogue around the dinner table or the fire pit in the evenings and share stories about the emotional journeys and the challenges that come up. And the other part is, I mean, that's part of the learning process. That's part of the experience. And part of what we're trying to do is give people the skills and the tools to get out there and have those experiences, because I think that's the only way to really, really, you know, connect with those things. You can't really read about it or watch a video about it. You've got to be out there doing it. And if you can be out there doing it by yourself at your own pace, I think that's going to be the best, rather than having someone next to you saying, shoot, or, you know, whatever.
That would not work for me. I'm like, have you ever had someone that's came out with you and legit just had like a overall like meltdown or like complete like spiritual awakening?
We've had a few. I'm thinking of one gentleman who joined us with his son one year and came back the next year with his son and daughter. And he considers himself a mostly vegan yogi.
Okay.
And he spends a lot of time with Amma, traveling around the world with her, if you're familiar with her, the woman that gives the hugs.
Yes.
And he, you know, this was really not on his radar, and he kind of stumbled onto it and was curious. And I think he had a really good experience and just kind of an eye-opening experience to the whole process. And I think he's someday thinking about working up to doing some significant hunting, but it wasn't something he had to get out and do right away. It's just more taking these steps, understanding how it all works. And I think it gave him a different appreciation for meat, where his meat comes from, and what he's eating when he chooses to eat meat.
And then would that not make you just not want to eat the meat overall?
What meat?
Like having that experience, like this guy, coming in as a primarily vegan and seeing all of that. And I think, yes, you definitely gain a greater appreciation for meat, but then do some people just take that the total opposite way and are like, yeah, and that's why I'm not going to eat it?
I haven't had anyone like that yet, but I've always told myself and others that if somebody had that reaction and decided to give up all forms of meat protein, particularly the factory farmed and commercial meats, I would feel that that's also a success because we're at least waking people up to the fact that our commercial meat industry is a little bit problematic.
Very, very. And then, I mean, when we spoke, you don't eat meat very often. When you go out and you hunt, then you eat that meat. But in terms of actually purchasing meat, like in Seattle, and when you eat out, what do those eating habits kind of look like for you? And I'm curious if there's a emotional component that comes into that.
There's somewhat emotional and somewhat psychological, thinking about where whatever's come from. And I guess I eat out less and less because I have such good food available to me, and I enjoy cooking it, and I know where it's from. But of course, there's that occasional time when you're just out of the mountains and tired and about too many calories short, and you need a quick burger or something. So it's not perfect, but I do my best to try to find stuff that is at least farmed locally or something, but you never know for sure. And I don't have the same connection and good feeling about that food when I eat it as I do with, say, thawing out an elk steak and eating that. And it's a much different experience. Like, I know where this came from. I mean, I know I cut this off the animal. I tracked this animal for 5 days in the mountains and packed it out on my back or in a sled and processed it. And those emotions and experiences come up a little bit every time I eat a little bit of that. And and thinking about the energy, maybe the potentially intrinsic energy and something like that versus something farm raised stuck in a cell. I've said before that something like we've made it easy on ourselves at the expense of the animals over time, because it is difficult sometimes, but because we've made it easy, because we don't want to go there, or because it's been extracted out of our society, we put that burden on the animals. So now they have less natural lives. They're slaughtered and processed without much thought or heart in the process. So it's interesting. I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical or preachy, but
it's okay. Go there.
And I don't like to preach hunting. I mean, I often ask myself, should we be hunting? What does it really mean to be a hunter in this day and age? And are we evolving out of it? I don't know. But it's been part of our history for so long, and history doesn't necessarily dictate the present or the future. However, I think there are a lot of things in this world that we'll never know. Yeah. And I've accepted that this is who we are, and this is how we've existed on this planet. And if we just pull this component of hunting out and throw it away, we might be throwing away something that's critical to who we are on this planet.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that all kind of partially goes back to one of my initial questions of, like, what is the purpose of or why would we go and hunt when we have just such this abundance now? That is there a real need for that? And I think, like you mentioned, there's more to it than just the actual hunt and just or than the actual kill, maybe. But just having that whole experience can be very reconnecting to nature. And I think there's a whole kind of subset of our brain that is very much neglected in our concrete jungles, of where, being out in nature can be so therapeutic, and feeling connected is like at the core being of who we are and what we need in life. And so the fact that, going out and being, and interacting and experiencing nature gives us such this connecting experience. It's like, going and being involved in that, I think, can help with so many things. It can be so therapeutic. And it's, I think, less of like, should we even be teaching people this, or should we even be participating in the hunt, and more of like, how can we make our farming and our agricultural system actually look more like this
natural system?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And that's a big question and undertaking.
I know. But I think that even just providing these courses for people and opening their eyes to this kind of experience can help just kind of people take that extra step when they are at the grocery store, questioning like, I actually don't know where this came from. I don't know what's in it. I don't know how it was packaged. Like all these things, all these questions that you start asking yourself that, kind of helped mold my food journey of becoming more vegetarian, of like really wanting to know the answers to some of these questions. And we may not be able to like overnight, totally change factory farming and all of that. But I think that the more educated we are and the more connected we become to our food, that it's, we vote with our dollars. And I think the more that we can kind of push some of those things out, that the better everything will be. I
agree. We're certainly in an interesting time in history, and there's been a lot of change.
Yeah.
And, it's easy to get overwhelmed by it all sometimes, and just want to forget about it or turn the other way.
It's so easy to do that, to just go out to a happy hour with friends and just eat whatever is there, because you got to eat so you can drink, so you'll be good. All these things that it is so much easier to turn a blind eye. And that's why I think having conversations like this are so important, because they make us a little uncomfortable, and it's like, can be a little scary to talk about, because then it's like, once you know this stuff, then it's like, oh shit, like now I maybe got to do something about this, because it can kind of start to elicit this feeling of guilt of like, I know I feel that when I'm like eating charcuterie plate, I'm like, I don't feel good about this. And it'll encourage me to be like, I'm going to eat the nuts off of this plate more than I'm going to eat the charcuterie meat. But that it can, in a way, help us to make better decisions when it comes to our food, because ultimately it's going to make us feel better with ourselves.
Yeah. And maybe another way to look at it is to slow down and really ask ourselves, what kind of experience do we want out of life?
Yeah.
Do we want to take more control about our journey?
Yeah.
Or, are we happy letting other people put everything in front of us in a nice, neat package?
Yeah.
We've got a limited amount of time on this planet, at least this go around. And I think more and more about that, and how there's so much potential in the natural world to reconnect that way to something deeper and grander.
Yeah.
And we also are running the risk of losing a lot of that opportunity. I mean, as more people get disconnected here, they don't care about what's happening in Alaska with the gold mines, and somebody's going to make how many billions just by getting the thing signed so they can extract a bunch of gold at the expense of probably ruining a couple of salmon rivers, which is the Pebble Mine, if you're not familiar with that. So speak out against it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of examples like that. And the less we are connected to nature, the less we care about it, the more people can exploit it. take advantage of it, and then it's gone. And then we're kind of in a
and then we're no longer here
situation. Yeah.
Eventually at that point.
I mean, we can survive an economic crash, but we cannot survive an ecological crash.
Yeah.
The earth can, but we can't.
Yeah. We take something so small and what can seem so simple as just what we're going to put in our mouth, what we're going to eat for the day. You know, we eat so many times a day, and it seems like such a simple, just normal act that we do. But really, it can expand out to so many different layers of life and everything that it's so mind-blowing, but at the same time, it literally is. It's like, oh, yeah, like it's just this simple step, and then I'm actually impacting all of these other layers with just this one small step, just changing of like, am I going to purchase this meat at Costco? Well, not Costco actually kind of does a good job sometimes.
The big box grocery store.
Yeah. Big box grocery store.
$2 a pound or whatever.
Yeah. Or of going to a farmer's market and, you know, purchasing something that's going to be local and connecting with that farm. And one of like my favorite things with going to the farmers markets, and when I lived in Baltimore, I did this, you know, I did eat a lot more meat then. And, I got some like breakfast sausages, and I'd get chicken and ground beef from this one farmer in Baltimore. And then literally, you know, my boyfriend and I at the time, we were able to literally go to that farm and like hang out with his family and like see all the pigs and the piglets and the cows and like literally saw how everything was happening. And it was so fun just like to be connected in that way and to be like, yeah, like they care so much about these animals and they're being so well taken care of. And like they're, you know, just really getting back to like the core of life and teaching their kids this. And it's just like, it was such a different experience of like, I feel so much more connected. I feel so much healthier. I feel just better about myself in making this decision to like help his family and help, you know, the animals that are there. And so that they can do more of that. And again, that voting with your dollar just felt so empowering, and it's such a different experience than going to a grocery store. Yeah. Such a different experience.
That sounds like a Portlandia episode, going out to the farm. But it's a great example. And I really like the smaller scale, you know, human scale, pedestrian scale encounters, you know, and smaller interactions are, for me, a lot more deeper.
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, even in teaching what you teach where, you know, people literally could be doing some of this on their own. And I think when you do have these small pockets of, you know, local farmers who care about sustainability, and again, it's like their families are living right there, you know, so like they have a lot more invested in this, and it's not, you know, a huge corporation saying you have to grow this amount of corn so that I can do this with it. And, you know, I just think people are so much more connected, and they care so much more about what their quote unquote products are, that it's feeding into your community, it's feeding into you, it's like feeding into your own mental health. And I could go on and on about it because I think it's just a fantastic thing. And we really do have so much power in terms of where we purchase our food from.
And we're from nature. Yeah. Ultimately. Yeah. And it does kind of feel like going home when I'm out there in the thick of it. So have you done any gardening?
Yes. I had a big garden in Baltimore, and actually had a farmer who was right down the road from me, it was pretty decent sized urban farm. And he actually came and like helped me sow my my little garden plot, and had that there. And then now here I just have a balcony, so I have a bunch of pots out there. And last summer I grew all these tomatoes, and it was just every single tomato I had, I like cherished the fuck out of. I was just like, oh, like how expensive it was to purchase the soil, to purchase the pot, you know, the water. Like it's just, you have such an appreciation for it. And it is such a labor of love. Like, and I would always joke that, you know, when my garden's thriving, it's because I'm thriving. And like it picks up on my energy. You know, if I'm not doing well, like my garden's not going to be doing well. Yeah. It's a reflection of me. But it's I'm sure different, and I'm sure similar in some ways to like the hunt itself. And that is one thing I love about the courses that you're doing, is that there is such a variety of things. And so you just did like a shell fishing excursion, and you have one that's like with foraging and not necessarily hunting. And maybe that's where I start, with foraging over the hunting. But overall, I mean, I still just think it's an amazing step.
Thank you. So how would you feel about having a hand in processing an animal and then curing certain mussels with salts and whatnot, maybe smoking them, cutting them thinly, and laying them out on a nice charcuterie plate?
If this podcast was video recorded, I would look like the Chrissy Teigen meme right now, where I'm like, ooh. I don't know, because honestly, I don't even touch raw meat. Like, I have someone actually had emailed me and asked if I could cover like being a hypochondriac in an episode. And I just think, again, there is such a lack of trust for me in our agricultural system that literally I got to the point where I don't even trust touching raw meat, and I'm such a spaz about it. And when people cook it in my apartment, I'm like, is that washed? Is that sanitized? Like, that needs to be, like, everything needs to be very clean and organized. And that's one of the reasons why it makes it kind of easy for me to be more vegetarian, is because I won't cook raw meat because I don't want to touch it.
Yeah, nobody needs a dose of mad cow.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't want to get anything from that. So I don't know. I would really, really have to challenge myself in stepping outside my comfort zone in doing something like that. And I do have such an immense appreciation for the people that do it. And, you know, I think it probably would be good for me to try it, but
something to think about.
It'd be an emotional experience.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but you know, it's again, I think it's worth it. I think all those times that we embrace kind of this discomfort and some of the fears that we have, it pays off, and that's kind of where the magic happens, and where you feel connected. And I can totally see where, you know, you said you literally have such a small window, even when it comes to the hunt, that I'm sure if you do actually get that after all the work you've put into it, that it's like empowering. And I feel like if I put myself in the shoes of that person doing that, I would almost feel surprised and like proud of myself of like, oh my God, I just did that. Like, exactly. I don't know. It's a lot to think about.
And again, it's hard to take it out of context. I mean, sitting here thinking about it is much different than being out there hunting.
Yeah.
And even being out the course, I mean, like, again, you know, having a few days to settle in and be with people and build that camaraderie and have that experience out in nature. I mean, we've got a beautiful setting with a log cabin, and can't see any other structures, or you can't hear the freeway.
Yeah. And, I'm sure it is. It's, again, I think we can change like our environment really helps mold us, and I'm sure different parts of us end up coming out in that experience that we wouldn't think. And context, I mean, we could not be farther away from that context currently as we sit in the middle of downtown Seattle in a WeWork. So very, very far from that context. But I appreciate even just the imagery that you've given in this conversation, because it has allowed me to put myself a little bit more in that place. And you know, I was just recently in Whistler, and that was all so beautiful, and just being around nature and in the mountains, it's such a different feeling. And I feel like we're so spoiled here in Washington State to have such easy access to all of that. But it's all super amazing, and I think very impactful work that you're doing. And if someone wanted to check out some of these courses and wanted to maybe ask you questions or anything, where would you say they could find you or kind of get in contact?
Well, through our website at humannatureHunting.com, and also social media, Human Nature Hunting, Instagram, Facebook as well.
Yeah.
But there's really the website has most of the information and contact info there, and I'm happy to have a chat with anybody who's interested.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this and talking with me about it. It's certainly, I have felt uncomfortable in it, just thinking about some of it, but it's all good. And that's why we need to talk about this kind of stuff, because it literally is at the core of our life. So
let's talk about it.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you guys so much for listening. And if you guys have any other questions, you can always shoot an email to ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. And as always, love checking out your reviews and your ratings on iTunes. So feel free to head over there and let me know what you're enjoying about the show. And that does it for today's episode. I hope you guys learned something new, and hopefully you guys can kind of take a step and, vote with your dollar and challenge yourself in new and uncomfortable experiences, and have a wonderful rest of your week. And I'll talk to you next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.